Today, we're going to be looking at sampling techniques and 7 different techniques that are used to get data. As a review, our ideal would always be to get data from the entire population, but that's just impossible or way too expensive. So instead, we look for a representative group. And if you get the right group, if you get the right balance, you actually don't need to go and survey the entire population. When estimates are done or polls are done to go and predict who the next leader will be of a country, they will often only survey a fraction of a percent of the entire population. And although there have been errors in the polls, it's incredible how close those predictions can be at times. So the key is just to identify the population and then to go and choose an appropriate sample. And you'll have to keep track of about 6 different methods of sampling, the 7th method being a combination of some of the others. So why do we sample? The biggest reason is to save time, to save cost. Can sampling be accurate? Absolutely it can, but it requires getting a group that is representative of the population. 6 types to look at here, and then I'll do a demonstration on a spreadsheet of how some of those are used, like using a random number generator, systematically going through your data set to pick the sample. Method 1, simple random sample. This is the one where every single individual has the equal chance of being chosen because every individual is assigned a random number. And that can be done in different ways. Sometimes it's done via phone numbers, where they will just randomize all the different phone numbers that are in a database and then select the first 100, the first 100 having no order because they've already been randomized. This is the only method that's purely random, but a challenge with the random method is that you can miss groups within it. Even though ideally with random, there'd be no bias and there would be no method of selecting certain groups, often minority voice is missed when you do a random sample, or other people in the population that might be underrepresented could be missed completely. Method 2 is the systematic sample. And this is where you take your entire population group or who's available to you, and they're put into order. And then in this case, you would determine what the preset interval was. So perhaps you're going to be interviewing or putting a survey out to every 10th person. You could go and have, again, a phone registry that this time is ordered, maybe ordered by last name, and you would call every 100th person that was on your list. Nonprofit organizations will do this quite frequently. They'll take their entire list of donors, so people that have donated to the organization before, and then we'll go through and systematically call every 100th person or using some other organized way. At a school, lockers are often set up this way, where lockers will be put into a systematic way where either grades are spread out or there's some kind of balance between upper lockers and lower lockers or the numbers that are assigned to homeroom. And so going and putting a survey into every other locker would be an example of systematic too. The third method, we have to just do a quick review of another term first. Your third method is called the stratified sample, but to look at what does this word strata mean, and strata just means to divide by type or to sort by type. The word that's used more in data management here is demographics. And so what you're doing is you're taking your entire population and you're grouping them based on common characteristics. This could be gender identity, it could be age, it could be education level. Income is often something that we look at when it comes to demographics. We see that in cities where we will have an area of a city where the average house is more expensive than in other areas and where the average income is higher. And so anything like that that you can use to go and break up your overall population. And then moving into the third type of the stratified sample, what this means is that individuals are chosen for the sample group have the same strata breakdown as the population. So that means that if in a school setting, you had an unusually large grade 12 class and 30% of your students were grade 12s, you would make sure that 30% of your sample group were also grade 12s. So in this case, it's not being equal, it's being equitable. It's making sure that each group is represented. If you wanted to just be equal, you would say there are 4 grades of students at our school. I'm going to survey 20 students from each grade, but then that would go and overrepresent one group and underrepresent another unless all of those grades were equal. Normally, when it comes to stratified samples, the advantage here is that you can get that minority voice. So if you have a group that's a smaller percentage of the population, you make sure that at least a couple of them are being surveyed as part of it. Disadvantages of a stratified sample: takes a lot of work, a lot of time, which means a lot of money in collecting your survey and sample too. Lots of different ways this can be done. They can be broken up by culture, country of birth, lots of different ways that you can choose to go and set up your demographics before doing the sampling. The next 3 types are not used as much, primarily because they're not as accurate, but there are contexts where they get used because of how simple they can be. Cluster sample is one that actually does get used more just because of the ease of it. And this is where you say, I'm not even going to try to do every 10th person or randomize my group. I'm going to just go to a few small regions and survey as many different people there as I can. So as an example, one of my friends from childhood has the job of going around to different Tim Hortons coffee locations and training their staff on how to cook. She is a cook. She'll train them on how to go and make the different bakery items, some of the soups, the chilies, the order that sandwiches are made, all those things. And so when she is going to a store to spend a couple of days there training a bunch of staff, she will go and do a survey for the kind of corporate organization where as many employees as possible, she'll get to do a quick survey. So it doesn't give an overall view, but what it does is get a high volume of surveys. And so she might have a group from an Alberta Tim Hortons, one from a Vancouver airport, one from a Toronto suburb, and she'll have a bunch of these different locations that she'll get to. The reality is that part of it's just being done because she's there already, and it's a way to go and get a bunch of data in a cluster. Interviewing in our homerooms at schools. So many schools, including TD Christian, have a homeroom kind of set up. And so our homerooms are actually intentionally mixed, where you have grade 9s to 12, balance of elementary schools that people went to, balance of international versus Canadian students, gender, all of those kind of things. And so because our homerooms are already well set up in terms of demographics with balance there, it means that by just surveying a couple of homerooms as a cluster, you actually get some pretty good representation. 5th type is the convenience sample. This gets used probably way too much simply because it's convenient. And in this situation, you sample a group in the easiest way possible for you. It's the quickest way, but it often gives poor results. Examples of convenience surveys, just the suggestion box where people at a school or at a store can go and write out their feedback and put it in. Sometimes at a restaurant, they'll give you a free appetizer or you'll get a discount if you do a survey. But it's often only a small group of people that will do that. And a lot of what gets written and put into the box can kind of be your more extreme opinions. Someone that's just liked their experience at a restaurant is likely not going to respond. Someone that's really hated it will, or someone that's good friends or family members with an employee might go and give an extra good review. But that's kind of the problem with the convenience. It's really just whatever's easy, whoever wants to look at it. Other methods of convenience sampling could be just some of these surveys that show up online where it's really your choice whether you look at them or not. And that's what gets kind of tricky between the difference of convenience and voluntary response sample. In this case, the sample group is not required to complete the survey. It's just left there as their choice. So these would be things like a phone survey that's just automatically generated. One of those things where you answer the phone, if you do that and they don't immediately start talking, there's a bit of a pause, and then a voice recorded response says, please press number 1 if you are going to vote for the Conservative Party, number 2 if you're going to vote for the Liberal Party. And they know that the vast majority of people hang up on those. So it's a voluntary response. Mail-in surveys used to be fairly popular. It's still how different government organizations like Stats Canada goes and collects data by mailing out a survey that people have to fill out. But other voluntary response samples could even just be an advertisement that shows up before a YouTube video. And whether you go and click on that to go and say what your favorite type of car is, or favorite type of food or cell phone or something like that. They don't require the response. And so as a result, the group is really just based on who decides to do that. The last method is not so much a separate method as just a combination of any of the other 6. So you could go and take all of the stores within a chain of stores, randomize them, and then decide based on that random order that you're going to cluster survey within that. So it's not like you're randomizing the people, you're randomizing the clusters. The most common way that multi-stage sampling is done is to start by using the stratified method, where you group people based on demographics. So again, maybe by culture, maybe by income, and then from there you randomly choose within those groups. So you do your breakdown and you say 40% of my group is this characteristic, 30% is this, 20% is this, 10%, and then you're going to go and randomly randomly choose maybe 1 in 10 people from each of those groups. So those are our main methods of sampling. And then from here, I'm going to go and show a couple of different ways that a spreadsheet could be used for this. And I'll also kind of use it to go and demonstrate a couple of little shortcuts and nice little techniques that could be done within a spreadsheet too. So here I have my data group that so far is not really logically ordered other than these random student numbers that I created for them. And I'm just going with first names here. But that is not how it would normally look. So you would actually start with just whatever list you have. And then an excellent feature on spreadsheets is this feature called Format as Table. And you can pick any little design or format you want and modify it later. Notice how it says my table has headers. That just means the title's up at the top. And I'm going to say, yes, it does. And now I have a little bit of nice format that's been added in, but more importantly, I have the ability to be able to sort. So sorting is important for something like sampling technique number 3, which is your stratified. So here I go and have my group broken up by the different demographics, which are grade. And then I can also go and sort by student number if I wanted to do systematic and say I'm going to go and take every other student to go and survey them. But the other portion that has to be added in is this random number. And spreadsheets have different techniques for this. Over on this side, I've used the basic formula for random number, which is just doing random equal to RAND with the brackets, and it automatically assigns a random number that goes between 0 and 1. But I'm not limited to that. I could also go and use a formula like rand between, and then go and set what I want the random number to be between. So I could set it between 1 and 50, negative 25 and positive 25, anything I wanted. The important thing here is that it's been randomized. And so now I'm going to zoom in a little bit more on my original chart, just so you can see some of this kind of in action here. So I just have this set up based on a general random number that's there. And if I go and sort by a random number, I actually am not sorting at all, which is what randomization is. I'm just randomizing all the different names that are there. So there's no bias in this. I can randomize it as many times as I want. You can see the student numbers have all been scattered here, the grades have been scattered, and yet it's kept people together because of this table. So when you keep the table together, watch a name like Rachel, who's student number 20 and is in grade 12. As long as I have done this overall table, when I sort, all it does is scatter the order, but it still keeps everyone's information together. And so now when I find Rachel here, she's still student number 20, still in grade 12. She's just been moved to a different spot on the spreadsheet. That's really important because if I hadn't set up this format as table and all I did was something like going to insert data and sorting one column of numbers, I would then lose the benefit of having Rachel's student number and grade assigned to her. It would actually wreck the data set. So always use this format as table option because it assures that each person that's within your data set stays together. Okay, so now that I've done this random sorting, I'll do it one final time here. Now that my group has been randomized, I don't need to go and survey all 23. I could just go and take this first group here, and I actually have a random sample. What if I want to use one of the other methods? If I want to use systematic, I'm now going to go back and ignore my random sample and just have everyone ordered by student number. And then I could go and select every other student to go and survey, or I could go and select every fifth student, something that goes through in a systematic order. For stratified, I now need to go back to my strata, which in this case are grades. That's the demographics I've broken students down by. And I would go and look to see, first of all, do I have equal numbers? And I don't. So I go and I have 5 grade 10 students and more grade 9 students. So I would go through and say, I'm going to survey approximately 20% of every grade. And so in this case, there would just be 1 grade 10 student that would be surveyed, but maybe I would have to do 2 grade 9s just to kind of represent that group a little bit more. And then from here, the other surveys don't use these methods, or the other sampling techniques don't use these methods here because they're not as good, because they're convenient or they're just done on a cluster. So in that case, we really just use some of these spreadsheet methods for this. The systematic side that I set up here too could also be used if I am going and doing some kind of demographic first. So maybe I want to go by gender or by age or something like that. And I'm just going to have my grade 12s go first here. So I could still go and separate this way and do it stratified, and then go through systematically and do every odd numbered student in order to just have a different way of doing a cluster method. Last little technique to show here is that there's lots of different shortcuts that can be used in spreadsheets. And if you're setting up something like a list of numbers, you never have to go and type them all in. So spreadsheets are excellent at getting the pattern of what's happening. As a side note, look at the fact that every random number regenerates every time I do something in a spreadsheet, and that's because there's no order to the random number. So every little change I do, the list gets re-randomized so that there's no kind of pattern that can go into it. But when I actually want to make a pattern, what I do is I start that pattern, and then this is your select button. I want to go to the copy button. So I'm going to copy and continue that pattern down so that I can have a number assigned to all of my students. So those are just a couple of the little techniques that can be used when it comes to doing systematic samples, stratified or simple random samples. For the first 3 types of sampling groups, you would often use a spreadsheet or some kind of database to help with that. The other ones are not using those techniques because they're just simpler, more convenient, or based on voluntary samples. So now your challenge is to look at a bunch of different situations and decide which of the 6 methods are being used, and then also to look at situations where there's a population you want to survey and which is the best method to use for each one.